So whether you're thinking about from your computer desk to your car to your fridge, clutter is clutter, and it's going to affect you whether you see it, are conscious of it or not. Welcome to The Shift, where we search for ways to do better by thinking better.
Whether you're going through a major life change, looking to deepen your understanding of yourself, or hoping to improve your relationships with others, The Shift is here for you.
We're your hosts, Isla and Yashar, an endlessly curious sister and brother team.
As certified brain-based executive coaches with backgrounds in medicine and management, we combine the neurosciences, performance psychology, strategic planning methodology, and mindfulness techniques to empower your transformation from the inside out.
Join us in conversation as we explore better ways to show up for ourselves and each other. Welcome back to The Shift, friends. Today's topic is clutter, and Yashar does not want to do an episode about it. So let's see how it goes. So what we're really talking about is the neuroscience of clutter, why we need clean and clear spaces, how they affect us mentally, our mindset, our productivity, and what is the power in, clearing, decluttering, reorganizing, and what happens to us mentally and emotionally when we do these acts, how they can be profoundly spiritual acts, even to improve our mood, our productivity, and heighten our creativity. So we are going to mind shift clutter today, give you the neuroscience of why it's important, and try to get Yashar to have an episode about cleaning up.
In my defense, I have to say that I've become much, much better and actually have now seen this topic as something worthwhile. I know when we first talked about this many, many years ago, my emotional reaction was one of Teflon. It's like, get this thing off me as cleanly and as quickly as possible. However, now I have to say that, yes, there is great science behind what we're going to discuss, making me a believer, and something that probably a lot of people struggle with because of the emotional ties that can go into space and clutter. And now learning and recognizing over the years how fundamental that can be to someone's ability to think more clearly, make better decisions, and just feel emotionally more grounded and stable. I've definitely changed my tune about this. So right. I just want to say that off the hop, in my defense, I have evolved with this topic.
So it's funny because we talked about this in so many different ways, just the aesthetic of things. We see it when I talk about fonts with you, and you were like, I don't know why we're talking about fonts. And I explained to you the messaging different fonts will give us, a different messaging, different advertisements, and different color tones, and how we organize our homes will give. And so we've progressed a lot since our, early days in these conversations to now. And I know I'm on one far end of the spectrum. I know that I am a less is more person. I don't like stuff. I would happily live in a hotel-like setting all the time. And I know that doesn't work for many people. So I know for me, this is really natural. If you see my Airbnb wish list, I like a very particular aesthetic. And so I know it's not always the case for everyone, but I want to pull on why certain things I gravitate towards, why energetically they calm me, and how it can work for you in whatever setting you are. If you are a more stuffed person than I am, or you like different colors or aesthetics, that can all work. But I do want to talk about some principles of why certain things will overload your brain and affect you in ways that you might not even see or know.
And that's the biggest scientific point that we should highlight right off the top. And that's this idea of cognitive load. This concept that the amount of information we're holding in our working memory at any time is going to directly affect our understanding of what's happening around us, what's happening within us. It affects our mental processes, our learning, our problem solving, and of course, our performance. And so for somebody like me who used to be a lot more dismissive of this subject matter, the science has really, again, informed me that I should be paying a lot more attention to this and how it affects me. And in fact, as I'm saying this, I remember a couple of years back, you actually said, oh my gosh, I've created a monster, when we were talking about a certain aesthetic when we're doing a workshop. And that was the highest compliment I could have received from you. Because I started paying a lot more attention to how these things not only affect me, but how they can affect other people. In this particular case, other people were our workshop participants, and we're trying to create a environment where insight generation is so important and needed for us to be able to do the work we want to do with those individuals. So this concept of cognitive load has to be respected. It's not something that's just, again, a feel-good message. It's something buried within the science. And all of us, no matter what we do in our day, need to be good at processing information, learning, problem solving, and of course, performing. So once we understand that, then just like the dynamics on a computer that slows down and doesn't function as well, and how frustrated we get with that, then I would akin that to our day-to-day internal environment and how we can do better.
So we paired this episode with a blog post. It's in our show notes that will give you kind of mind shift ways to declutter and reorganize your home to optimize the space for you. So we're not going to go into all the nitty gritty in this episode. However, if you want more information, please click the show notes for the full blog post on ways to mind shift your space. So, the whole point of what we're talking about here is that the energy we receive and is taken from our physical spaces is remarkable. The stuff creates barriers in our thinking and our growth. The art of letting go then can entice a revival, a renewal of energy and ideas. So, your piles of laundry, the dishes, the papers, your endless to do lists, even are going to be exhausting. They're going to be stress inducing, and they're going to inhibit your brain's ability to focus and make clear decisions. So, a shift needs to occur to optimize your thinking. So, whether you're thinking about from your computer desk to your car to your fridge, clutter is clutter, and it's going to affect you whether you see it, are conscious of it, or not. And so, the research illustrates to us that a decluttered and organized space can help you maintain more calm, more focus, and ultimately be more productive.
So then we have to ask the question, if this is all true, and if this is what the science is saying, then why don't people keep their spaces clutter free? And there's an extreme version to this called hoarding, which we won't talk about in this episode. But I think we all live on a clutter spectrum. And some of us, maybe like Isla, or even maybe more extreme than Isla, are minimalists and want less and less and less. And then we obviously move into just your everyday clutter, your everyday changes that you see in and out of papers, groceries, garbage, bags, backpacks, if you have children, the stuff that just happens in the day. And then further along, you have a cluttered space, which doesn't ever really change and just maybe accumulates more clutter. And there's no real organization within that. So the question is, along that spectrum, why are we in a cluttered space? I can speak from my own personal experience that I think one of the reasons clutter accumulated was because I didn't want to use up more time and energy to organize and understand or get rid of the stuff, because that meant I had to face the stuff. I had to think about the stuff. I had to make very conscious decisions about what I'm going to do with that. And that was a real hurdle for me. And even when someone like yourself, Isla, would come along and help me with it, it would often flip right back. A week to a month later, I would have my papers and my space filled back up with clutter. So I'm really curious about your experience, because prior to MindShift, prior in your whole other life, you used to do a really interesting decluttering with clothes with individuals in their closets. And so I know there's a huge emotional piece to this. I know there was for me, and not maybe even out of lowercase t or uppercase T trauma, but just the emotional weight of just doing the thing. However, like I said, I also know that a lot of times trauma does play a role in how we hold on to things or how we don't face some of the clutter that we have. So can you touch upon that on the emotional side of why some people you've noticed in the work you've done will not face or work through some of the clutter they have?
Absolutely. I think that what I found whenever I've done work with offices or people with their clothes or, in people in their different spaces is that our attachment is always in question of what this thing represents is really and it ties back to our safety. So we talk about things, but it's never things, is it? I always joke that those were like my first therapy sessions with clients without knowing was in these processes. We were like in parallel play doing an activity like decluttering a closet, but really it was the first forms of holding space for people, shedding parts of themselves, transitioning with versions, transitioning with times of their life. And and mourning and grieving, so these are the big themes that came up. So these stuff are just represented, they're just material objects of parts of us that we are shedding, healing, and having to reevaluate our attachments to. And you'll see that a lot with how we evolve through our seasons. In certain cases, going into parenthood is a big one, right? Like versions of you that you have to shed to like now birth this new version of you. And then these objects are holding on to those pieces of you, in whatever way, whether it's your favorite t-shirt that you wore, in a mosh pit at 16, or your wedding dress, and you're now divorced. Like all of these things are holding, it's not the material, it's the memory of it. And so in certain cases we keep them because they mean something. In other cases, we learn how to release and let go of things that no longer serve us, just like we do with our patterns and our narratives. We do so also with our stuff. And so what all of this requires is the ability to have that conversation with yourself. And ideally, yeah, when you have it with someone else there holding space for you, it provides a little bit of padding and cushion and compassion to have these types of conversations and do these big things. And I think that's when it gets a little bit more nuance of what is this about. Other times it's just the reality, like it's a mess, you have young kids, you have a busy job, you're overworked, overwhelmed, and you're finding it hard to find the time and space to actually just get the job done. And if you have the power and privilege to hire someone to assist you, that's wonderful. And if you don't, you're going to have to figure out ways to take from other parts of you. And then you ask yourself the question, is this worth my time? Like, I'm sure when you're overwhelmed and that's happening, you ask yourself, is that worth my time? And of course, for me, that happens a lot. I have piles of laundry on the couch at times. I'm not always doing everything, in this, magical way. But at one point or another, when I notice that things are getting overwhelming in the home, I do have to carve out the space to realign with the way that I like the home to function. I think it also is the reality that we consume a lot. And so some of this is a conversation with our consumption. And do I really need to buy this thing? Do I need to attain this thing? Do I need to have this thing? Even when people are giving away things for free, like when I had young kids, a lot of people were giving me stuff. And I actually would be like, no, I don't want it. And people were almost offended, like, no, you need this. And I was like, I don't actually need it. Even if it's for free, I don't need it. If I feel that something I don't like the look of or don't want my kids to play with, I can also say no. And I think these are then conversations and relationships you have with consumption. And like, again, the feeling of safety when you buy, the feeling of safety when you get, and maybe healing those parts of yourself that you don't need to buy and get constantly to feel safe and secure. And that is not necessarily freedom. And so I think that's, to be honest, what the core of all of this is when you have resistance beyond the actual, I'm overwhelmed, time constraints of it, like I don't have time to clean, mop, fold laundry, organize my cupboards because I'm overwhelmed. That's one conversation, that's reality. And then for that, we have to time block and shift things around and find space to do that. The other part is, if your resistance is emotional, these are the type of questions I would ask. But more than anything, help the person find their intrinsic why and why we're even doing this in the first place. So it less looks like I'm taking something from you and more looks like I'm giving you a tool to empower yourself.
A muscle of empowerment when it comes to decluttering is such an interesting one, and one, again, that I wouldn't have really put any value in until I started doing it a lot more myself, whether it's through my decision to start decluttering more or through life events where you move homes, you move cities, you move countries. And I've gone through this process more often, recognizing that I'm holding on to, let's say, clothes or belongings because there might be a use for it down the line sometime. And then recognizing the more I get rid of it, I give it to others, I give it to charities, and how I never actually even think about that piece or those things anymore, or very, very rarely. And so I came up with this whole concept in my mind that the amount of time I tell myself I might need that thing is way more than the amount of time that I actually needed that thing. And being almost practice in this process of decluttering and taking things out instead of bringing more stuff in, I really started understanding that concept that you just spoke of and the empowerment of I actually need less And this less is really, really such a powerful ground to stand on. And I remember reading something about minimalism and the neuroscience of minimalism, and the idea that they put forward, this author, was giving time allotment to each thing you have. So say you have like 4 pairs of shoes, and each shoe is, 30 to 60 seconds worth of thought. And then you have a home, which is like an hour to 2 hours because the value is much higher of thought. And then you have X, Y, and Z. And they went down this whole list, lawnmower to like snowblower to 2 cars or 3 cars. And they just went through this list, and it's not a perfect science in any way, but the whole point was to demonstrate all of this stuff takes up this much time of thinking, whether paying the rent, cleaning, switching out, finding someone to even give it to over and over again, because you keep consuming and bringing it back in, and then you do this process over. And it ended up being hours upon hours of time where you're just thinking about stuff that you have. Obviously, the more stuff you have, the more you think about it. And so the concept is, how do I get good with not being attached, as you said, Isla, to the stuff that I have, and becoming clear on what is empowering me, what provides me with value, and for everyone's going to look different, and letting go of those other things that don't do that. And so it's a really interesting subject that as I said, I'm more interested in and more careful about not to dismiss. And so this is coming from someone that's a recovering clutter bug. And I keep bringing our attention back to that point, because it's really easy to think this is about two people who just like cleaning up all the time. And it's not. It really is not about that.
And to be fair, I actually hate cleaning.
Right.
I'm just exceptionally great at organizing. So cleaning is still extremely hard for me, but I'm exceptionally good at organizing. But that's because like my brain likes to organize chaos, and that's why it works well with MINDSHIFT and our clients, and like, and I just bring it to stuff as well. So it's really just, that's how my brain works. It sees patterns and recognizes ways to bring information together. And so it's just a skill set I have that I can also translate to the bookshelf, as well as to, the boardroom.
Right.
So I was saying that like the why is what I really want to empower us with. It's why we're doing this in the first place. And then ideally the steps to do it, we can find in the blog post, like I mentioned. But the whys I want to stick with a couple seconds to explain to you what is happening in your brain and why it's important. So one of the major things Yashar first said on this episode was the overload, right? That our brain has a limited capacity to process information. So if we're looking at too many things, it overloads our visual cortex, not only the things we see, but and then also the things we're already thinking about. And so it reduces the brain's ability to process information, focus, and make decisions, like we said. So the visual intake of multiple stimuli will overwhelm us. And the studies have shown that the brain will only absorb 1% of this information. So it suggests that if that is happening and we're only processing 1%, what is happening to the rest? It's overwhelming our system and stressing it out. And what that's doing, whether again we're conscious of it or not, it's triggering our stress hormone cortisol, which again increases that tension and anxiety within our systems. And this is what can lead to us then having unhealthy habits and coping mechanisms, consuming foods, avoidance through screens. And I'm not saying any of this is bad in moderation, but it is something to note. If you notice you're going to these things because you're overwhelmed with your space, and then you're going to food to self-soothe, you're going to your screen to avoid to see whatever you're seeing in your house, these are the parts where I want you to take note of what is actually happening, from oversleeping and binge watching and all of that, because we have unfinished projects we don't want to deal with, right? Again, there's nothing against taking a night off and watching all the shows you want to do and having a relaxing evening. What I am asking is, why are we doing this at certain times? Is it because we're avoiding this? And this might be because of the increased cortisol and stress we're having from all the stuff around us that's leading to higher cases of depression, anxiety, and lowering again our capacity to think clearly and make decision. And it's also affecting our relationships. And that mess is creating silent tension, whether we see it or not, within ourselves and within the people we're interacting with. Another interesting one that's happening in your brain that you might not know is our perception of time changes. Clutter can tell our brain that there's too much to do and too little time. So we might be canceling plans, missing gym appointments, feeling like we can't commit to certain things because actually our space is so disorganized that it's making us sense that we don't have the time and space to do other things when it might not necessarily be true. Another thing that can happen that I think really was happening with Yashra at the beginning was numbness, which was what I often heard from him at first when we had these conversations, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that this clutter doesn't affect me. I don't see it. It's not there. And I know that is because one of the side effects of this is numbness. Again, because your body is overwhelmed, because the stress hormones are going wild, because the perception of time changes, everything, you end up numbing your system as a coping mechanism. You numb so you don't realize the clutter. You numb so you don't smell the smells. You numb so your body doesn't have to experience all that is around them. And again, it's because it's too overwhelming for your system.
That was absolutely something that I would say, and probably again, not because I was trying to be defensive or dismissive, but I probably really thought that. I thought that the clutter didn't affect me, and more than I thought that, there was people in my life, whether it be people intimately in my life or others that I studied in history, that would have messy offices. They were like deep thinkers and artistic people. And I thought this was like the sign of a genius at work. And so there was a romanticizing of the clutter. There was a romanticizing of the busyness. And there was probably a validation of like, I'm doing a lot of things, a lot of deep work, a lot of thinking, and therefore this is the way it has to be. And to that point, like probably true in a season where you're heavy into work or research. I still like when there's papers all around me with my thoughts or research around me, and I enjoy that. I enjoy the being surrounded by what I'm consumed by, because I can get quite obsessive with ideas and I dive deep and I like it all around me and I jump from one idea to another. And that is the chaos that has helped me actually formulate deeper and more cohesive thoughts. It starts chaotic and it becomes more aligned. So my space actually shows that, my environment shows that for me. So it's not that I think that's a bad thing. However, it's when that never completes, when you're always in the chaos, when you're always in the messy environment, that I think it becomes more of a problem. So I didn't complete the cycle. I left it and I thought I was numb to it. And I remember the first time it was all very, very clean. And it felt very, very good. And we have an example also of when we used to work in office spaces together, where we'd go to a co-working space and the office was very set up for deep thinking. And time actually went by more quickly. Ideas flew through us. We talk about flow in a different episode. I believe it's episode 21. If you want to listen to that episode. But it all makes sense now from a scientific standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a visual processing standpoint. This all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And we had one time that me and you were walking through a furniture store and you're like, I don't care about this stuff. And you know how much I love all things home decor. And so you were like, I don't care about this stuff. And I said, do you not? Like, let's look around. Like, what mood does this couch put you in? What mood does that table? And it took a while. And after a while, you had a very strong sense of style. You had like, I would call like a cottage chic look. And I was like, there you go. You do have an opinion. And this is kind of the same thing. Like, we think we don't need or like or whatever. We have these things, thoughts about ourselves. Like, I don't care. I don't know. I'm like, do you not ever like take a moment, have an experience, and now try to form your opinion about this. I had a conversation with one of my best friends the other day. I have this massive playlist of like 300 songs, as I called it the other day, like my junk drawer of music. And I was like, I don't really care. I just like to throw things there. And she's like, do you really not care? And I was like, yeah, it's just like when I'm in a mood, I put a song on it. And she's like, no, if I came and started deleting songs off your playlist, how would you feel? I was like, what? That's just bad boundaries. That just seems like wrong. But her point was the same that I'm making here, which is like, we like think we don't care, but we actually do. We all actually have very strong opinions on our things. It's just we articulate it and need it in different ways. So I was like, you're right. I do care. I do have a way and a method to my madness. And it is important to me. And so, yeah, okay, I do claim that. It might not look like your way, how she does hers, but the way I do it, this is how I do mine. And same with the furniture, same with the mess. It might not look the way I do. How you do it is not the way I look at it, but you do actually have a preference. You do actually have a need. And it's just taking the time to come in tune with that and recognize what that is for you. And the last point I want to bring up today of why it's so important to understand what is happening with our brain and how to shift it is the idea of change resistance, is that your stuff is consuming energy. And so you might become change resistance because of it. What I mean by that is that keeping your things the way that they always were means you're always seeing things in the same way as well. And believe it or not, by keeping your spaces the same way year after year after year, might mean that you continue to see your problems, your people, the way you do things in the same way as well. So allowing yourself to shift and move things around tricks your brain into also allowing yourself to see your life differently and expect different things from your life as well and yourself. And I think there's a lot of mind tricks people sometimes talk in neuroscience about, like when you are having writing block, like change the hand you write with, or when you can't sleep at night, change the position you sleep in your bed. All of these are the same idea, is that making your brain have to think outside of its regular thinking patterns and boxes. And that's the same with your stuff. If your furniture hasn't moved in years, if your city hasn't moved in years, if the people you talk to hasn't changed in years, most likely you were probably seeing things from the same perspective, the same way. And some shift is required if you want a mind shift.
I was just thinking the same thing, a productivity hack, an insight generation hack about how to change the environment, how to change your body position, how to do something different. Even the concept of, if you drive to work, you drive the same streets the same way, and how to take a different route, just to do it differently. Otherwise, we become so robotic in how we function, and that doesn't allow for our insights to come to life. That doesn't allow for diversity to happen. Why being in nature is so interesting, because there aren't complete straight lines and things change and it's dynamic. And so whether we're consciously aware of it or not, being part of an environment that's changing like that allows us to feel more freedom, more flexibility, and more interest in our thoughts and what's happening around us. And why even going for a walk can help us work through challenges and ideas. This shift is so necessary, pardon the pun, not just this podcast, but the movement in your life. Because without that, you're stuck in a box, seeing things in the same way. So another piece that I think is highly underrated, but really easily accessible, is just moving things around, changing things up from time to time, and seeing what can be inspired through that.
Thank you for listening, friends. What shifted for you during this episode? We'd love to hear your insights. Write us with any questions, commentary, or episode ideas at theshift@mindshiftleadership.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we would deeply appreciate a like and subscribe.
The Shift is brought to you by MINDSHIFT Leadership, a heart-centered, evidence-based, mindset-powered leadership company, empowering you with the training to prioritize mental health, inclusion, and performance optimization.